Good morning. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. It's Friday, January 28th. The time is 9:38 a.m. and we're resuming testimony on three bills introduced just this morning. We have our counselor, Ellen Schakowsky, in to work with us, and we'll take the bills that we just discussed with their sponsors in reverse order. The last one we were talking about was S-272, an act relating to entities required to comply with Vermont's renewable energy programs. So, Ms. Schakowsky, if you could, you can tee it up in whatever way you like, and then you could do a screen share and give us a walkthrough. It'd be helpful for us to see the language. So we haven't seen the language on any of the three yet. We just talked with sponsors.
Okay, so 272 is where we're going to start.
Yes, please.
Okay, so 272. Screen sharing this, I'm not sure is going to sort of help much, but and I'm not going to do a full walkthrough because 272 is 30 pages. And and I wasn't here for your introduction. So this bill has two sections. In the first section, all of Chapter 89 of Title 30 is amended. It changes the phrase retail electricity providers to the phrase electric utilities. And it does that throughout. And so the renewable energy programs of Chapter 89 are they include the renewable energy standard and all three tiers, the standard offer program, the RIGate requirement, the net metering program. So these are there is a very specific definition used in that chapter of who the entities are that are required to follow the state renewable energy programs in this chapter. And it's retail electricity providers. It does not use the word utility most of the time. So in order to address the concerns of the sponsor, the language has been changed to say electric utility. So that phrase is changed throughout, and the definition is on page 2. So the definition is being changed. So the prior definition was retail electricity provider, and that meant a company engaged in distribution or sale of electricity directly to the public. And so that definition is being changed to electric utility, which means a company engaged in the distribution, transmission, or sale of electricity. And it's striking the requirement that it be to the public. Senator Bray, I don't know if you wanted to talk. Did you just describe this change?
Yeah, I mean, my description was that basically that and you can describe this more precisely and expertly, but that the troublesome, I think, application to create this novel self-managed utility turns in part on the notion that they are not going to be a retail electricity provider, because they are going to be the utility that's engaged in purchasing in the wholesale market. And therefore, they are justifiably exempt from all the provisions that flow from this phrase retail electricity provider, which importantly from, I think, this committee's point of view, entails them participating in all those programs you just listed, like standard offer, the RES, RIGate, also payments in on that support low-income programs. Support even the Department of Public Service itself. That's the nature of. I don't think that that's a if that's what their definition, if that's the basis for the application, that they are not engaged in any kind of retail activity, they're very much a utility, and they're very much an electric utility. And the fact that they're a utility that also consumes all the power they purchase makes them, in my mind, actually a de facto customer, and as well as a utility. But we don't need to get into arguing that. It's just that this precludes their novel and someone making a similar application for a novel self-managed utility using the same arguments, and says, I think that was my thinking behind my request to you in making this drafting request.
Right, and so I would also add that retail electricity provider isn't used in other parts of Title 30. And as I mentioned before, the definitions in Title 30 are a little bit confusing, especially if you're looking at this application that's currently before the PUC. And so using the phrase electric utility, I think, is a phrase that's well understood and is referenced in other parts of Title 30. So this definition of retail electricity provider was specific. In looking at the legislative history, it has a very specific definition, and the committees were contemplating an entity that would potentially be acting like a utility without having any customers, and wanted to specifically exempt them from this originally. So this change, I think, by striking the reference to need to be selling to the public, and also using a phrase that's more in line with the rest of the title, I think was what we discussed would be a good change in this bill to address the sponsor's concerns.
Can you remind me in the committee why we're adding transmission to the list of electric utilities? Is this because the term applies to transmission companies now, and we need to add them here to keep sort of a coherent definition? Like one definition?
No, it's because the facility at issue has a transmission station, and as part of their sort of overall model are intending to be transmitting their power to themselves.
Okay, thank you. So then the balance of the pages just swap in the phrase. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, for the next 29 pages as well,
right.
Except for right at the end. So you're right. So this, I'm not going to do a full walkthrough because really it's just switching out that phrase wherever it appears in chapter 89. So everywhere that it appears, it's been switched. But there is a second section of this bill right at the end. So down on page 29, new language is being added to section 202A, the state energy policy. So it is the general policy of the state of Vermont, and the new language is added at the top of page 30. To meet Vermont's energy service needs by maintaining a regulated utility market focused on renewable energy that does not provide retail choice to individual customers.
Should I say, I'll say something about why this is here, and then you can help us with the law. So Vermont made decisions in the 1990s not to go the route of some other states and deregulate, which allowed people to engage in retail electric choice. Basically, you choose your own, the distribution assets. Anyway, I'm going to all the weeds on this, but that customers get to choose their electric company. That's been implicit in the way we've managed the system for the last 25 years or so. But it wasn't stated explicitly. And the docket across the street, I would say, is kind of a clear example of someone engaging in electric choice. They would probably object to the phrase retail electric choice, but again, I think it's a distinction without a difference to say that you claim that this chimerical entity that calls itself a utility on the one hand and not a customer, but it's a customer on the other hand because it uses all the power of that utility. So this helps bring clarity to the notion that we don't support retail electric choice in the state. And that helps us bind people together into a larger coherent policy that is how we've done so much of our energy work in the state. That's the editorial version. I don't know if you want to say something more, Councillor.
No, I agree. I think that the statutory scheme that has the Public Utility Commission directly regulating all aspects of public service businesses within its jurisdiction does imply what's stated on page 30. It's just that it isn't stated directly like this elsewhere in Title 30. So this is an explicit statement on how the current system is working, and it's formalizing that in the state energy policy.
So maybe you could, are there any committee questions on the language itself? Otherwise, I'd ask Ms. Chakowski to do exactly what she already did, so that we could have a discussion. So Senator McDonald, you had some questions that I said I think council would be better positioned to answer than I am. And Senator McCormick, you look like you have something on ready to go. So Senator McCormick.
Well, Senator McDonald's ahead of me.
I'm sure if I asked the question, I sort of made a statement that it seems that this customer of electricity has gone to the PUC to suggest to the PUC that they ought to be in charge of this decision rather than those clowns in the legislature. No, I attributed the word clowns to what I would say if I were in that position. By doing so, you're sort of creating what we used to call gold towns in this system, where the gold towns, didn't have to go out and they didn't need state aid or anything like that. They just took care of themselves and everybody else was on their own. But we don't permit that anymore for education. Why would we allow how do you keep the PUC from simply deciding that they're going to put themselves in charge of something instead of policy instead of us? Yeah, I think you would go to the courts and say they can't do that. But I don't think it belongs in there. So it's not a question. That's just my rambling.
Okay.
Now,
Senator McCormick.
yeah, I just wanted to clarify something I had said before the break, but it's here now as well. When as a legislator, I get protective of legislative prerogatives. I'm not saying it's not up to the PUC to write the law. We write the law. That sounds a little bit like I'm being like a turf battle. And there's a little bit of chest thumping there and asserting my authority, Actually, and when you're entrusted with the power to write the law, you ought to be a little bit humble about it. You don't want that kind of arrogance. But what I'm suggesting is that our power, exclusive power to write the law, is not ours to give away. the humility is misplaced because it's not we derive our just powers from the consent of the governed. And we owe it to the people who elect us to write law in their behalf to not let somebody else do it because the people didn't elect them. And it really, and I just want to make sure that it's not that I'm real protective of my prerogatives as a senator. It's rather that I am respectful of the voters and recognize that no one should be writing law who wasn't elected to do it. Second question, and this is someone, I know people who have their own solar arrays and are off the grid. We're not invading their territory, are we? Ellen, that would not be an unintended consequence of this. That's a question. That's not rhetorical.
So this definition is a company engaged in the distribution, transmission, or sale. So I don't think an individual person on their own property would be, because it is using the word company.
All right.
Distribute, and I don't think distribution.
Well, let's live with it. A little belt and suspenders, we could
Flag
put
it.
in a line explicitly
Yeah.
saying that we're not saying that.
Yeah.
That we're not saying that the off the grid family is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all from me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, thanks it's just the beauty of thinking with a group of people about something, because you think of different cases. So there's off the grid. And I suppose too, I would just want to double check now that you've raised that question. If there's any nexus to net metering where someone's generating and feeding power some of the time back to the grid, and gaining a credit with their utility. I don't know that it constitutes a sale. I don't know what the legal status of that power flowing back and forth at different times is, but we haven't discussed this at all before, so I don't expect you necessarily to have an answer off the top of your head, but along the lines of what Senator McDonald's saying, I think we wouldn't want to inadvertently imply that something was improper about a net metering relationship. Do you have any thoughts on that one, or just want to look into it?
No, I mean,
Mr.
I
Chair.
would look into it, but
Senator McDonald.
What keeps coming into my mind in here is the notion of having your cake and eating it too. And we seem to be looking at a situation where someone wishes to be treated like they're off the grid, but they get to stay on the grid at the same time. How isn't that what the request is? We're going to be off the grid, but we get our electricity from the grid. That is having your cake and eat it too. And I don't think the PUC is empowered to make that sort of policy decision. No, we could say you can't do X, Y, and Z by law, which we have done. And then we can say notwithstanding, and you can eat it too. But we haven't said that. And if we haven't, that's up to us to say, not the PUC. So if I were Global Foundries, I sure as hell wouldn't ask us. I'd ask the PUC.
Well, they followed your advice so far.
Well, yeah, if I were on the PUC, I'd take the power and say, we got the power now. And the legislature, who are they anyway? And for the customers around the state of Vermont, they're going to scratch their heads and say, what happened? You're letting the guys with all the money do the cherry picking? No, it's right back to gold towns again.
Well, I think, we haven't analyzed that docket, but one of the, in terms of rate impacts, but There are rate impacts with a large customer like that withdrawing from GMP. For instance, the cost of operations is now divided over 10% fewer kilowatt hours. And so that's an upward rate pressure just in terms of operations and maintenance. Have more cost has to be assigned to every kilowatt hour sold. So that's a pretty straightforward as well.
Well, of course there are rate impacts. That's what this is all about. I mean, we'll invite Willie Sutton in to testify. He would say, I want the law to give me all the money, and I'm going to go to where all the money is. That was called bank robbery. Here, it's looking. That's not bank robbery. We're looking for the PUEC to make a decision about whether or not we can have our cake and eat it too.
All right. So I'm gaining a sense of where the committee is. Are there any questions for our lawyer on this matter? Okay.
I would just add, in response to both senators, not questions to me. You are the legislative body. You do have this bill in front of you. You do have the ability to amend this bill. If there's ambiguity that you would like to clarify, this could potentially be something you could work on. In addition to the language that's there, you could potentially add additional language to address concerns that you have.
Okay. And again, so I want to be careful. We're not hearing the request of Global Foundries in any way, shape, or form in this bill. We're addressing a question that's been raised by them following that application. So I want to be careful not to have us engage in too much discussion of that application in and of itself, because in order to do that responsibly, we would have to take on a tremendous, for instance, examine the record that's been built across the street, and that's already happening on another front. So this says, in response to that situation, let's think for ourselves looking forward. And so I want to keep these two things clearly separate, because the bill does not speak to the current docket. All right. With that, then doubling back, the bill before 272 that we heard was Senator Parent's bill S-278, an act relating to airport expansion and primary agricultural soil mitigation. If we could go to that one, please.
Sure. So this bill looks at the requirement to mitigate the loss or destruction of primary agricultural soil under Act 250. So the language is very short. So Section 1 is amending Section 6093 of Title 10, which is the section of Act 250 that addresses how mitigation for the loss of primary agricultural soil is calculated. So there's a number of provisions in this statute setting out a formula for how you calculate the amount of soil that needs to be protected if there is a loss of soil. So new language is being added to this at the end, at the bottom of page 2, state-owned airports. Notwithstanding 1 VSA 214 or any provision of this chapter to the contrary, the conversion of primary agricultural soils by a development or subdivision by a state-owned airport shall not be required to conduct mitigation or pay a mitigation fee under this section if the development or subdivision is the result of land acquisition, improvement, or maintenance authorized under 5 VSA Chapter 15. This is the statute directly related to state airports, or the development or subdivision was authorized under the Federal Aviation Administration Airport Master Plan for the state-owned airport. I did consult with our transportation attorney on this, Anthea Dexter Cooper. I don't know what a federal master plan for airport looks like, but she contributed this language here to make sure that we're capturing the correct airports here. And the state-owned airport obtains any permit or permit amendment that may be required. So state-owned airport shall not be required to do any on-site or off-site mitigation for the loss of primary agricultural soil. The notwithstanding language on line 18 references the requirement that new language not impact pending applications. And by notwithstanding that language, this bill would be applicable to any pending applications for state-owned airports.
So this, the land we're talking about is already owned by the state. That's a presumption of this bill. I mean, I'm wondering if an airport could say, we're going to expand our footprint, and in so doing, acquire adjoining property that's currently in agricultural use.
So no, it doesn't matter if they own it at the moment. It's for if the land development is going to be the result of land acquisition, improvement, or maintenance for a state-owned airport.
Okay. So it's a narrow release. I mean, it's out of the ag soil mitigation requirement. I'm just wondering around that. So, and I think there's cost implications. That's my understanding of what the motivation is. I'm wondering if there are, surrounding this release, there's a planning process that enables adjoiners, for instance, to have some influence over the expansion of an airport. So I know, for instance, there's an airport in Middlebury, Vermont, and neighbors have been concerned about the expansion of that airport and more noise and et cetera as it gets busier. So this is really a question outside of the bill proper. Is there an entire planning and development process that would still go forward? We're just talking about taking out an ag soil mitigation provision that would normally be part of it.
Yeah, the last line requires them to still get their Act 250 permit. They're not exempt from Act 250. They're just not required to do any mitigation for prime ag soil.
Okay.
And I do not know what the other state requirements are for state-owned airports. I do not know, but they are required to go through Act 250 under this.
Okay. Are there other instances where we waive the requirement to do ag soil mitigation entirely?
The only other one is for affordable housing units in designated downtowns. It's very narrow to one specific kind of affordable housing.
As in preferred housing projects, or even narrower still?
I can't tell you. I can get back to you at the in a minute.
Okay. I'm guessing there's not that much ag soil value in terms of agriculture to ag soils in downtowns, or does it? I mean, they're probably not in production anymore, but they do still serve an important environmental function.
Okay, so it is not for priority housing projects specifically. It is for residential construction that has a density of at least 8 units per acre with at least 8 units or at least 40% of the units being affordable housing. So that is actually different than most of the other definitions we use in Act 250 related to housing.
Okay.
So it's dense.
8 units per acre, and
Yeah.
40% of those units must be affordable.
Yeah. And currently for priority housing projects, it's only 20% of the
20%.
units. Yeah.
I think that figure has come down.
Oh, and they need to be permanently preserved for a period of 99 years or longer. So permanently is theirs. They need to be 99 years or longer. And currently for priority housing projects, I think it's only 15 or 20 years.
Right.
So yeah, it's the most restrictive housing gets the no mitigation. And I think that is the only type of development that has that currently.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Any committee questions about this? And Senator McCormick, as a district commissioner, do you have any thoughts on the prime ag soils? Well, agricultural soil, not prime, agricultural soil mitigation waiver.
Again, to be clear, let me remind, my experience as a district commissioner is 30 years ago. So it's, but I can't say that Senator Parent made the argument that the soil in question is not prime ag soil anyway, that they're already removing gravel from it. That's the kind of argument that one can make, an applicant can make to the district commission. And offsite mitigation is not an automatic condition of an Act 250 permit. It's sometimes it's when you get a permit to develop prime ag soil, and then the commission might impose a condition, but I'm not sure that we need to not even have that discussion in the Act 250 process. But again, I'm not. Since you asked, Mr. Chairman, that's a question I would want to answer. I'm not actually taking a solid position at this point on that.
Yeah. Okay. So let me back up then. Thanks for that. And ask council: is mitigation required always? It's just a question of the ratio.
Yes. So criterion 9B of Act 250 says if the development is going to cause a loss or reduction of primary agricultural soils, the first step the applicant needs to take is to try to mitigate or rearrange the site to determine if they can minimize how much of the soil they're going to lose. An applicant should look at the soil maps. There are soil maps, and their soils are ranked from 1 to 11. Only soil with 1 being the best, 11 being of the least use or productivity. So soils 1 through 6 are required to be mitigated and or protected. The soils of lesser quality do not need to be protected. So you need to look at a site and actually determine what types of soil you have on the site, because often there is a mix of soils on a site. And if you are, if your site is 10 acres, but only 3 of those acres are prime and the rest are not prime, you only need to mitigate for what is the most prime soil.
I see. Okay.
And then the calculation starts with the presumption that unless your site is located in one of the designated areas, you have to do on-site mitigation. You need to find an area on the site and conserve the soil, rearrange your buildings, or find a corner where you can conserve the soils on site. If you're in a designated center, you can do off-site mitigation, which is calculation of a fee based on the value of the soil. That fee then goes to Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which uses that fee to purchase and conserve a parcel of primary agricultural soil elsewhere. However, though, as Senator McCormick just mentioned, there is also a third option, which is available to the district commissions to do flexibility between the two. And so an applicant can ask to do a combination of on-site and off-site if potentially they, are using up most of their parcel for their construction and they don't think they have enough room to conserve soil. They can ask to partially conserve and partially pay a fee, or ask to essentially pay a fee. So there are options in this process, but then there is a formula in statute on how they go about calculating the exact amount of soil that needs to be protected.
Okay. And I'm just trying to think of, in the midst of an airport, what the function of these agricultural soils is. Are we talking basically that it's part of a plan to manage stormwater? I mean, is that their value? It doesn't seem like they're not going to be crops again. So it doesn't seem like very likely. I mean, they could be crops if the airport is one day gone. I suppose you could say that, but is there do you know if the thrust of why we do this is that we're trying to retain soils so that we can better manage stormwater? Just trying to think of the rationale.
No, it's an overall statewide requirement. And so the overall goal and the formula in statute requires that if someone is going to be destroying primary agricultural soil, they need to conserve more than what they're destroying elsewhere.
Okay.
So Act 250 permits all over the state are issued for the destruction of primary agricultural soils, knowing that more is going to be conserved and protected. And so either with on-site mitigation or going through VHCB, a permanent agricultural conservation easement is created elsewhere so that in the future there isn't a total loss of the ability of the state to have farming.
Okay. And that's why you're saying more. So that's like the 3-to-1 ratio, for
Yep.
instance.
Yeah,
To
it's
conserve
between
3.
2-to-1 and 3-to-1 for developments.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. Any committee questions for Mr. Chakowski? Committee observations, analogies, metaphors?
I just, so this is right now, this is in Act 250. I mean, these are Act 250 restrictions right now, Ms. Chakowski, as it relates. Okay, so we would, okay. Okay, thanks.
Yep, so we're talking about an airport that is applying for an Act 250 permit for construction, and they would like to be exempt. State airports would like to be exempt from the requirement to mitigate loss of primary agricultural soil.
Do you happen to know how many state airports we have?
I do not. Someone in House Ag Googled it yesterday when I was testifying, and there is a list, but I do not know off the top of my head.
Okay.
There's 10 state airports. There are 5 private airports, and there's one municipal airport. Does this relate to just the state airports?
Yes, just state.
And the question I would have is, how many airports would this really be an issue for?
When you say be an issue for, I'm not quite sure I know what you mean.
I think the Franklin County Airport is where the field days are held. I've only been there a few times. I took my motorcycle lessons there to get the stamp for my license. It does sit in an area where there are farms in proximity. The airport in Caledonia County on Pudding Hill is in the middle of the woods practically. I'd be interested to find how much of an issue this is for state airports other than Franklin County.
Okay. Well, and I think Senator Parent was saying that he's been working with VTrans. Is that who administers the airports?
there's a whole division within transportation that is the airport division.
Okay,
And there's a director of the airport division.
And I do think that they may be the ones who normally apply for the Act 250 permits for the airports.
Well, they have to because they own it.
Yeah.
You know, that the other five or the other six are different. The airport in South Burlington is a municipal airport. And then there are 5 private airports.
so private, is Basin Harbor, for instance, considered a private airport?
Basin Harbor's private, Warren is private. There's one in Post Mills. There's one in the Deerfield Valley. There's one in Shelburne. Those are all private.
Okay. All right.
I wouldn't want to do anything for a private airport.
Okay. So we'll hear from VTrans. Senator McDonald?
Is the purpose of this to locate housing along the closer to airport runways and stuff? Is that what the ultimate goal is here? Or is it warehouses or what? What
No, I don't think this has
problem is the
anything to do with,
legislature
I don't
before
think
us
this has anything to do with-
seeking to resolve? Yeah.
So
Could
I think,
we be reminded of the problem that is seeking to be resolved by this legislation?
sure, I think that if the airport was here, I suspect they would say that paying to mitigate primary agricultural soil can be expensive. And developing an airport in itself is expensive already. So this is a cost associated with Act 250.
Okay, so it's not a housing thing.
No, this is not related to housing as far as I know.
Just as a little background, the airport division, until within the last 5 years, has always been cost the state more to have the airports than we got offering the airports. I don't know the makeup and the economic makeup of the whole system. Franklin County has been one of the few airports that paid for itself because there were flights in with not commercial flights with people, but flying in with parts and different sorts of things like. So I suspect it would be buildings to facilitate the airport.
I think Senator Parent mentioned like an industrial park concept.
Right. Because they fly
Okay,
stuff, they fly stuff in on a commercial basis for stuff.
Okay, so I was trying, Mr. Chair, go understand the reason that we have laws to protect prime agricultural soils, and that is that once they are gone, then the ability to feed people diminishes. And as global warming continues and millions of acres become rendered arid and Florida goes underwater, there might be a time when we looked back and said, wow, how did we, what happened to all our soils that were able to grow stuff? And there's been an effort to see that that they don't disappear. So we're discussing reasons for trading away our current agricultural prime soils for benefits in the weeks, months, years, decades to come. And we'll have a smaller reserve if we put on another 5-6 billion people on the globe, and where are we going to grow the food? So I think that's the trade-off that we're trying to establish policy in. So I better understand what we're being asked to do.
Okay, well, thank you for that articulation. So we have more to learn on this one. And also I'd like to, timing wise, I would say, unless someone we have new bills that are coming in. If committee members, you don't need to make a judgment now, but if any of the three that we have this morning feel like things that become past before by crossover, let's have a conversation about that. And with that,
Yeah, I mean, I would, if, Mr. Chair, whenever I think a colleague brings a bill in, I just, yeah, I'm hoping to give it have some more witnesses in, as I believe you're planning, and continue this conversation and see what we can do. Absolutely.
okay,
I'd like to know what they plan at the airport.
right,
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I think this would be worthwhile jumping into.
sure. The other question that comes up for me is, well, what's currently going on with that land? Now you could say you're losing prime ag soils, but if they have not been in production for a year or 50 years, it may be that, it's a sort of judgment call. It would be helpful to know more. And so noted, thank you. And I'm just keeping my eye on the clock. So we have a third bill, and that was Senator Brock's bill S-270, an act relating to Vermont housing regulation modernization.
Right, so this one will actually sort of be more of a formal walkthrough.
Okay.
All right, S-270, yes, has a short title, the Vermont Housing Regulation Modernization Act. There is a finding section on page 2. So the General Assembly finds that according to the Vermont Housing Needs Assessment, Vermont continues to face a severe shortage of housing to meet its affordable housing needs. Protracted permit timelines and regulatory hurdles are often cited as major impediments to expanding the supply of affordable housing in Vermont. In recent years, the state has greatly expanded investments in affordable housing through the issuance of bonds, increased allotments for tax credits and other incentives, enhanced amounts for housing assistance programs, and additional appropriations for housing-related items such as weatherization. State permitting processes have not been formally reformed in nearly 2 decades. The average duration of an Act 250 permit appeal to be resolved by the Environmental Division of the Superior Court is 334.8 days. To the extent regulatory permitting reform has occurred, it has related to affordable housing. Success has been realized in mitigating the cost for housing development and reducing the time from permit application to project approval.
Can I ask a quick question? Where did those findings come from?
The sponsor of the bill.
Okay, thank you.
Priority. So the first section deals with the amendment to the definition of priority housing projects under Act 250. So most of this bill is Act 250 related. There are a couple of other provisions, including a sales and use tax, and then some language around the environmental court itself. So first, it's amending the definition of affordable housing under Act 250. Specifically, it's raising the threshold for rental housing, how that is defined as affordable. And it's on line 10, it's raising it from the percentage of the gross annual income of a household at 120% of the highest of the following: county median income, area median income, statewide median income. So it's raising it from 80% of the median income to 120. 120 is currently the calculation that's used for owner occupied housing. So it's bringing those two things into alignment. Next, again, under the definition of priority housing project, it's streamlining the definition slightly. So currently, to be a priority housing project, you have to be a housing project located in one of the designated centers. You have to have it has to have at least 20% of the units be have a covenant that they're affordable housing. But currently, if it's a an affordable housing project in a designated neighborhood development area, it has to be a project made up of mixed income housing only, so housing only. However, in designated downtowns, new town centers, and growth centers, it can be affordable housing in a mixed use project. So a mix of commercial and residential. So what this language is doing at the top of page 4 is striking subsection B and just saying development located in any of the designated areas can be made up of mixed use or mixed income housing. So it's allowing for mixed use housing in neighborhood development areas.
So the exemption is, or the redefinitions are not housing exclusive.
What?
The, we're expanding,
Yes.
commercial development would also be granted the sort of new latitude that we're talking about here. Okay.
In NDAs.
In
It's-
any form of designated area?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Not village centers, but
Okay.
oh, actually, yes, village centers. I'm sorry. Yes. Mixed use in any of the designated areas.
Okay.
Okay. Section 4 amends the exemption section of Act 250. It again condenses the exemption for priority housing projects to read that no permit or permanent amendment is required for a priority housing project in a designated center. Previously, there was a different type of a exemption for the downtown development mixed priority housing projects. So this is combining them again into being just one exemption. So then section 5 is a new concept. It's adding language to 6086B, the section in Act 250 that establishes the downtown findings and conclusions process. So currently under Act 250, any type of project that would need an Act 250 permit, if it's located in a designated downtown, they can apply for this expedited shortened process called a findings and conclusions process. And this is a little bit different than Act 250's normal process. It has a shortened list of criteria that the person needs to apply for. It also has a shortened timeline in which the agencies and the district commissions need to reply to the application. So this is adding new language on page 6 to extend this option to other areas. So housing developments in counties with high demand. During a period in which a county's median gross rent is 10% above the median gross rent for the state, this option for findings and conclusions shall be available for development under subdivision 6001-3 within that county for which a permit or permit amendment would otherwise have been required. So this is for housing development in these so-called high demand counties. This is a new concept. This sort of phrase hasn't been used before in Act 250, but it would allow housing projects to use an expediting process as opposed to, other options that have been considered like a full exemption.
So that process that started in the middle of page 5 there,
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that process. So in lieu of obtaining, this is all new language. In lieu of obtaining a permit or permit amendment, a person may request a findings conclusions.
No, this is not new language.
Okay, right.
This is an existing process that is available currently to anyone in a designated downtown.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's an incentive available to projects in designated downtowns that have this expedited process.
What's the relationship? So for instance, in a designated downtown, I thought that was an outright exemption from Act 250. And this seems like
No.
un-
No, there's currently no exemptions for any of the designated areas. That's just what we've been talking about for the last.
Right,
4
okay, I'm sorry,
I
misspoke.
know.
For a priority housing project in a
Right, so
designated,
priority housing projects, yes, they have an exemption.
right,
But this is mostly about commercial development. And so, yeah, so this is talking specifically in this bill about housing.
right, okay, thank you. I wandered outside of housing and back again, thank you.
I know, I'm sorry. I also have been wondering if I already did this walkthrough with you, but it's because I did a walkthrough of this bill in multiple other committees. So stop me if I'm not explaining things slowly enough. I did do a walkthrough of this bill with Senate Economic Development
Okay,
also. So section 6 is adding, or again, back in the exemption section of Act 250, and we're adding that new language we just talked about. We're adding this to the exemption section. So housing in a high demand county does not need a permit or permit amendment after they've gotten their findings and conclusions. And then next on page 7, so in section 7, we're out of Act 250, and now we're in a sales and use tax exemption. So this is adding language in Title 32, the tax title. At the bottom of page 7, it adds language that the following are not subject to the sales and use taxes: sale of building materials and supplies for any building or structure that meets the definition of a priority housing project under Act 250. Or the developer of a priority housing project. So this is a sales tax exemption, sales and use tax exemption for priority housing projects. Next, so now we're in section 8, and this is the section of Act 250 related to appeals. And there's some new language on page 9. The Environmental Division shall act upon the petition of an appeal within 30 days after receiving the petition if the decision relates to a project covered under the definition of a priority housing project. The Environmental Division shall issue a decision within 120 days after taking the action described above if the decision relates to a priority housing project. If the Environmental Division fails to meet the timelines in subsections B and C, the NRB shall refund the applicant any fees paid to the state under section 6083A, and the applicant shall not be liable for any additional fees under the section, regardless of the final decision issued by the Environmental Division on the appeal. So this is setting permit timelines or appeal timelines in which the Environmental Division of the Superior Court needs to act upon an appeal.
So can you remind us of the process that happens, that what's inherent in act upon an appeal? What do you have to do to have, what steps do they have to take to satisfy the having quote unquote acted upon an appeal?
They have to have a trial or settle the case. They have to have a trial. They have to go through the court procedure of deciding whether or not the appeal who should win the appeal.
Okay.
And so this would be for permit decisions and jurisdictional determinations also.
Okay, so they have 30 days upon receipt of an appeal to respond to it and hold the hearings necessary.
And then final decision within 120 days.
Okay. Does that mean they also have to complete the hearings related to the appeal within that first 30 days?
No.
Just at least initiate them.
Yes.
Okay. So 150 days total to get to final decision. Okay. Thank you.
And then finally, I think this is the last section, section 9, environmental court, appropriation and positions. So establishment of the following limited service positions is authorized for the environmental division of the Superior Court. 1 environmental division judge and 1 law clerk. There is appropriated the sum of $300,000 to the environmental court from the ARPA funds for the positions established. So this would give the E-Court an additional judge and law clerk and some money from the ARPA funds to, again, hopefully expedite decisions.
Do you know if there's been any discussion about the ability of applying ARPA money to such a position? I mean, it seems somewhat tangential to infrastructure, but you could argue, no, if we're going to get timely development, we need timely processing.
So the short answer is I haven't done an analysis if this would actually qualify for ARPA funds.
Okay.
The ARPA funds are not entirely specific to infrastructure. They can be used to address COVID shortcomings. And so I actually don't know if this would qualify. There may be an argument because the court is backed up due to COVID that this could be used. I don't know if that's actually possible.
Okay. Do you know if that $300,000 figure is sort of a vetted figure?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I think it could be potentially in the roundabout way. I mean, a judge probably is somewhere around 150,000, maybe a bit more, and a law clerk is somewhere probably around 80,000. So potentially could be in the right ballpark, but I don't think there's any math at the moment to specifically back it up.
And it wouldn't be your responsibility, but are you aware of anyone having requested a fiscal note or any kind of analysis on the cost of that tax exemption?
No.
Okay. All right. And I think the last thing left was we were still on some text, but all that was left was effective dates, right?
Oh, it's effective on passage.
Okay. All right. Any questions for Ms. Chakowski about an interesting mixture of initiatives? Well, who would we, Senator McDonald?
No, it is an interesting mix because we know that building this housing costs more money. It has to be subsidized, but we're cutting taxes to incentive happening. I wonder if Mr. Chair, I'm constantly whining about our attempts to deal with the symptoms instead of tackling what's causing the illnesses we're trying to treat here. When I say illnesses, I mean the symptoms of, they don't seem to be linked. And we're trying to link them and all of them seem well-intentioned. So. We just as kind of a basic example is we've provided many different opportunities for municipalities to create zones that have a whole bunch of incentives in them, and the municipalities don't do it. And if we knew why they didn't do it, does creating more of these things help the woman who drives from Burlington to go to be a nurse that drives from Swanton? Is rebuilding a southern connector in South Burlington going to encourage more people to live farther down Route 7 and commute longer distances? Or is it going to solve a problem in Burlington, or are we creating more long distance commuting, and at the same time that we're trying to reduce long distance commuting? I just don't see things don't seem to be linked, and maybe I'm focusing on that to too much. So, but that's what bothers me about these just kind of a shotgun approach here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Senator McCormick, or Senator Campion, or Senator Westman.
No, nothing at this time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Chakowski. I feel like our in baskets certainly been filled up in a way, in terms of none of these bills are long or complex, but there's more than meets the eye upon first reading, and all of them really. Okay. So I know you have, if there are not further questions for council, I want to make sure we don't ask her to stay here when I know she has other places to be.
I don't have anywhere else to be at the moment.
Don't.
I don't.
Shocked.
I already went to Senate Economic Development, so.
Right. So I'm thinking that let's finish so I think we're done with those bills for now, other than let's just actually, I'll ask people to think about them over the weekend. When we reconvene on Tuesday, we'll be talking about our timelines and schedules. So let's see which amongst them sort of rises to the top in terms of people wanting to work on them, and when, with the goal of basically we have to do the big sort, which is how many of these do we want to get out before crossover, if any. So we'll figure that. I did want to talk about next week briefly. So the two main irons in the fire are Act 250 and environmental justice. So we have a bill. I wanted to take some testimony to start honing in on, we heard from Commissioner Walk, who walked through a series of questions, pretty fundamental questions around, I think, converting the language in the current version of the bill into clear and actionable activities at ANR. And so we'll hear from sponsors of the bill to better understand the definitions they offered that were problematic, but we're going to need to start, I think we're going to be shifting to editing mode of starting to nail down the definitions and starting to get the gears working on that bill. I'd like to see us be able to move that within no more than 3 weeks. Act 250, I feel like we have a lot of options in front of us and we haven't really settled on a pathway. But we'll have people back in again on forestry, so we could revisit the forestry provisions. And because what is in there now was the very last version of a forestry bill. And it was, I would say, sort of the most attenuated version because it was sort of a final negotiation at that moment. But since we're resetting the table, I want to be fair to, we're resetting the table on housing in Act 250. Let's reset the table too on forestry and sort of just bring fresh eyes back to that. In essence, not giving away things that we believe were important, but had in a certain degree negotiated 2 years ago. I think everything's fair game all over again. And that's what our calendar is. I think we have some bits and pieces to address in next week as well, but that's the balance of the work. So let me do it in sequence here. On Act 250, we'll hear more from VTrans as it relates to Act 250 and permitting processes as they relate to V-Trans projects. Senator Westman's been helping with organizing that, the information. So we'll return to that piece of it. Are there other pieces of these bills where you say, yeah, I would really like to learn more about X, Y, or Z, and then start making decisions about what are our strategies going to be to support housing while also supporting good planning?
Mr. Chair, do we know when crossover is? I don't have that on my calendar. I don't know if we've been notified or not.
We haven't, thanks. It's a good question. I had floated it out to leadership saying, are we sticking with our current, our regular routine? And the answer at that point was, we think so. That was like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
So would
So
that
that
be
would be-
2 weeks after town meeting day or 1 week after town meeting
1
day?
week after town meeting is the regular
Is the
committee,
8th of March.
and then money committees get the extra week.
Yep, okay.
I do
But
think they
I'll,
formally decided yesterday that it is March 11th.
Oh, it is? Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Great.
good to know.
So that
March
is
11th.
crossover date. Okay.
March 11th is not very far away. So, all right.
Well, I think the big things, in addition to the work that you mentioned, Mr. Chair, I'm certainly hoping to move my fish and wildlife bill as well as the hound work, the hunting work that we've considered. So, yeah.
Okay. The other thing too, I wanted to thanks Senator Campion for that. Schedule a hearing. We have some provisions related to fish and wildlife, and I think for efficiency's sake, we could take some testimony, invite the public to talk with us, set up an evening hearing and on all 3 bills in front of us, so that we can be efficient about that. And I'm looking into doing that sooner rather than later, so that no matter what bill we work on, we'll have already heard from the public in a timely way. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. You're asking what I'd like to see us do before crossover. I had submitted the trapping bill really just because I thought it was the right thing to do. I wasn't really very optimistic about its prospects, but I was very pleased by how positively members of the committee seemed to respond. And of course, I'm hearing a great deal now from the public. And there is, there's a whole movement in the state, and they'd like to send some witnesses. I'd like the committee to hear from them.
Okay.
And of course, there's the on Act 250. I would like consideration of my umbrella permit approach.
Right.
By the committee.
Yeah. And are there, so we've talked about it, off and on, but are there witnesses, Senator McCormick, on the umbrella permit strategy that you think we should hear from in particular? And if you don't have that at your fingertips, if you could email me.
Yeah, well,
some
we've already
suggestions.
heard from the VNRC, who we're friendly to it. I don't know if it's their number one preference. I think they were looking to their primary concern obviously is forest, and I think they were looking for what was most likely to get a bill through. But they were certainly sympathetic to the umbrella permit. John Groveman spoke well of it, and I think what we want to do is just hear about how umbrella permits work in general.
Okay. Okay, so I see or saw Ms. Chakowski nodding. So I don't know if you've had discussions on umbrella permits this session elsewhere, or I can check in with you about people in terms of witnesses, so we can hear more testimony on that particular aspect.
No, it was just that when I did the walkthrough, you all had a lot of conversations about the specific elements
Right.
of the master permit, and I think it might be good for the NRB to give an intro on how they do that.
Okay,
Because I have read it and I have read some of them, but it might be good to hear from them how they administer that process.
okay. And so, Senator McCormick, to your official, the leg hold trap provision. So I'm figuring for the hearing, we would just invite testimony on any of the bills we have that relate to fish and wildlife. Because it might well be that someone would be interested in more than one. And just for the sake of efficiency, we should do that in a single event.
I just did a quick count. We're 20 days from crossover.
Yeah, so giddy up time. Okay.
Yeah, not much.
Any people on any of the bills were in our portfolio, are there witnesses that members of the committee would like to hear from? For instance, people you're talking with and you think that we should be hearing from them. Cast a broader net that way. Okay, so we're always open to adding questions and witnesses to the agenda. I'll work with Jude and we'll stay on that course, focused on Act 250 and environmental justice. Look at lining up the hearing and getting ourselves ready to move on to fish and wildlife. And we also have the weatherization work in the offing. So we need to double back and hear about, I think my guess is that statutorily, our connection to more weatherization work is going to be in the form of workforce. It's my understanding so far that the sort of novel techniques for financing, like an on-bill tariff, which has been given the new name Weatherization Repayment Assistance Program, RAP, but that's already allowed for in statute. But I'd want to verify that so that we make sure we're covering everything we need to cover. All right, well, with that, it is 10:55, floors in 35 minutes. I'm happy to wrap up.